reaching strong, looking out for hurting children all around, and helping the parents carry on. Standing united, we'll overcome. We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness.
A blessed good evening to one and to all. It is indeed our pleasure to welcome you here on the live for what is a very important and intriguing topic as well. For many, we have significant challenges as we navigate the area of grief, and tonight we're looking at exploring grief, finding strength and support after a family loss. And I can say that this is one topic that touches us all, yeah? And I'm joined by two esteemed members of the panel. That is Professor Errol Bolden and also Tony Olden. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We're going to hear a lot more from them shortly. My name is Romain Lovell, and I will be your moderator for this evening. And I'm looking forward to having a really good time, getting some valid information, because I'm here ready to take notes and everything from what is being said. And I know that we can all benefit from anything that is shared here this evening. With that being said, I want to encourage you at this time to just take a moment to share it with someone. As I said, all of us go through a period of grief. All of us have our challenges at times where we have a loss of a loved one, and you have to experience that, whether it be alone or with family. But I just want to encourage you, even if you're not particularly led to share it, just put it in your status, put it in a group chat, just at least share it once. If they click it, they click it. Yeah, we'll leave the Lord to work on them and to allow them to benefit from this discussion. So with that being said, just to give you a little insight as to what this evening session will be about, while you share the link, grief is an inevitable part of the human experience, and we all lose someone at some point in our lives. And grief's deeply personal and often isolating nature can make it one of the most challenging emotions to navigate. Along with losing family members, many persons lose themselves. The loss of a family member can shake the very foundations of our lives, altering relationships and reshaping our understanding of the world and also the world's perception on us. This panel discussion this evening aims, as I said, to provide a compassionate space where everyone can explore the multifaceted dimensions of grief, share your experiences, and seek solace in the knowledge that you are not alone in this experience. And the primary objective of this panel discussion is to create an open and supportive environment for individuals to discuss the impact of loss within the family. And this will be by bringing together, experts in psychology, bereavement support, and those who have personally experienced family loss. Our aim is to understand the different stages of grief and how they manifest in various areas in our lives as individuals, to identify healthy coping mechanisms and strategies for dealing with grief, and to explore the impact of family dynamics on the grieving process. We will also be looking to provide practical advice for supporting families, family members as well through the grieving process, and to highlight the importance of seeking professional help where necessary. And with that being said, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Professor Bolden. You can just unmute your mic and give us a word. So you can introduce yourself and let us know your background. And we're going to have our brother Tony Olden immediately after you. So Professor Bolden.
Yes, a pleasant good evening to each of you. I am originally from Barbados. I've been living in the United States though since 1984. So I've been in the United States for quite a while. I came up here to do my studies. My background, my professional background is in social work and public health. I have been working with various populations, such as the homeless population, dialysis populations, and did some work with disengaged dads. But more recently, I have, in addition to my work as an administrator within the academy, my full-time job, as I put it, is as a university professor. I was an associate vice president for academic affairs until recently, and I'm back in the classroom. But I also do a lot of work focusing on grief and loss. And right now, I'm developing different tools and maybe therapeutic coloring books, largely for kids. I'm working on one for adults, and as well as therapeutic tools in the form of games to help people to begin the discussion around grief and loss. So this is an issue that's very near and dear to me. Like everyone else, I've gone through it on a personal level and I've had to wrestle with some of the issues that we will be highlighting today. So it's a pleasure to join you and share from both my personal and professional experience.
Thank you very much, Professor Bolden. And moving on, as I said, to our brother Tony Alton.
Sure, thanks, and good evening, everyone. I'm Tony Alton. I count myself, I hope you do too as well. I count myself as a friend of Family Fest. I've been committed to my own growth and development for the last 40 years or so. And for the last 28 years, I have been involved in people, leadership, and organization development. And in the last 20 years or so, with a heavy focus on emotional intelligence.
Excellent, excellent. No, I also, as you would have mentioned, count myself as part of the Family Fest family. I've been a part of Family Fest from inception, and I'm particularly proud of the work and the ministry of the organization is very profound. It's very prophetic. Actually, in preparation for today's session, I saw one source that it said in order to deal with grief, you have to focus on hope, healing, and power of God. And you would have seen, even in the theme, that Family Fest is really focusing on help, hope, healing, and happiness. And I thought it was directly applicable. So with that being said, let's dive right into it. I will start with you, Professor Bolden. What are the different stages of grief and how can they manifest in different people?
Okay, as I say this, when we talk about stages, I like to caution folks because when we introduce something like this, people get wedded to this. My background, my training is one that pushes me not to focus on grief as far as stages are concerned, but as part of our discussion and to begin to frame what is generally understood, the stages of grief that Kubler-Ross identified were five of them, and it must be pointed out that her original work did not focus on grief and loss the way we're looking at it now. Her work originally was with the terminally ill. It's just that it has been adapted to the grief and loss community. And I must also point out that even Kubler-Ross emphasized that it is not a linear process, even if we embrace the five stages of grief. We must understand that people go back and forth between those stages, and sometimes people don't skip those stages altogether. And I needed to emphasize that because sometimes people get so wedded to the stages of grief and said, okay, this is what I'm focused on. This is the stage of grief that that's where I am as far as the stage of grief is concerned. So I like to be, I'm a little cautious in talking about grief and loss that way. But I know that people like to acknowledge, and it does have some some benefit to think about anger, and I had it right up here, and excuse me, and I'm going to pull it back up. We talk about denial as one of the first stages that in the model that was advanced by Kubler-Ross. And then we talk about anger, we talk about bargaining, we talk about depression, and we talk about acceptance. Those are the 5 stages of grief that is generally understood. The refusal to accept the reality that that a loss has occurred, the frustration over those, or resentment about it, then attempting to negotiate or make deals to undo that kind of loss, depression, sadness, or despair that's felt regarding the loss, and coming to terms with the loss. But again, I need to emphasize, right, that people not get so wedded to the stages of grief. And that's it, and that they would say, okay, I'm at this stage, or I should be at this stage, or because again, grief does not occur in any linear fashion. And as Kubler-Ross pointed out herself, right, that sometimes people don't experience these stages as well. So I have to put that caveat. I mentioned the stages because you were asked about it, and that's what's generally understood. But I am very cautious in emphasizing that in my work.
It's interesting. So it's already informative for me, I can tell you that, because in my mind, and I don't want to say I'm sure, but I'm pretty confident that in other people's mind, it's really just a period of depression. But from what I'm understanding, it's a lot deeper than depression. There are a lot of emotions that tend to have an impact on the way that you react after you've experienced loss. With that being said, how can we say then that the cultural backgrounds or influences have an impact on the individuals in the way that they experience grief or the way that they react to grief?
Oh, that's, I'm glad. Thank you for the question, by the way. That varies tremendously. And even if let's look at the subculture as far as males and females, the way we experience grief, the way we respond to grief as a male versus females vary. Females are given permission by the wider society to openly express their emotions, right? To talk about them. We as males have been socialized differently to not express our emotions. So some might classify us as emotionally unintelligent, right? But we are not given that permission. But it doesn't mean that we feel the loss any less. And let me just point out this particular experience that I had. I wrote a couple of children's books dealing with grief and loss. The first one, the little girl had experienced the loss of her grandfather, and she was crying, openly expressing her distraught. And she worked with her dad, talking about all of her feelings and what's not, and he was able to talk to her about what she was experiencing, the emotions that she was going through. I wrote a second book where the loss was experienced by a boy, and the boy, on the other hand, kept it to himself. And when I shared these books at a primary school in Barbados, I asked the question, do you think that because the girl was more expressive of what she was going through, that she was feeling the loss any less? And an 8-year-old girl was culturally aware enough to point out, no, it is just that he is not allowed to cry at 8 years old, right? But we must also understand that, again, when and we need to keep this in mind because we are focusing on the diversity. Barbados is not, is more diverse than when I left now. So you have cultures coming in, Eastern cultures, that when they're dealing with grief and loss, it is dealt with differently. Some cultures, grief is more of a communal experience, and there's sometimes a suppression of the emotions, right? And others, and in the Western culture, we tend not to like to talk about grief and loss a whole lot because it makes us uncomfortable. But in large part, ours is more of an individual experience. We have the wake and the viewing and all of those things. But in comparison to some other cultures, the way the community is involved, like for instance, again, and I'll wrap up with this one, in Ghana, when someone dies, if you travel around Ghana, you will see a lot of billboards with the picture of the person who died, um, and some specifics about them. And when I first saw it, I asked if this was someone famous. They said no. But that is what the community comes together and do. It is more of a communal response, right, than we would normally see. So culture does play a significant role, and those who are trying to get into or who are in the space and responding to those who are grieving, even in Barbados, where we are largely Black and of African descent, we must begin to realize that there are other cultures now that are part of our community, and how they respond to grief and loss will differ, as well as when we're talking to a male versus a female.
Okay. Interesting. We'll get into that a bit later because I'm particularly interested in knowing the different ways that men grieve in particular, in comparison to women, because I know you said that, it is generally believed that men are less emotionally intelligent, which is a fair understanding based on how societal norms have it. But I want to hear a bit from our brother Tony at this point, because I'm curious in your experience as well, what are some of the challenges that you find individuals, whether it be women or men, have to navigate in their moments of grief?
But maybe to go back a tad,
Sure.
because I think we'd be probably a little bit better served if we got an understanding of what we mean by grief. I agree with Professor Bolden. The Kubler-Ross model is widely accepted. But in my own experience, a training and practice, it has some deficiencies. So when I think of grief, grief is not exclusively about the loss of a loved one. Grief is fundamentally about loss, full stop. So I can experience grief having lost my job. I can experience grief having lost social status.
Yeah. I
can experience grief having lost my home in a fire, or my inability to pay my mortgage.
Yeah.
At the core of grief is sadness. Sadness is an emotion about loss being experienced, as opposed to fear, which is an emotion about loss anticipated. I'm not sure if I'm helping you here.
Yeah, you definitely are.
So at the core of grief is sadness, which is about loss, whatever the nature of that loss.
Yeah.
Grief is a complex state of emotional being. Complex in this sense. Grief is sadness at its core. It can be comprised of anger. It can be comprised of guilt. It can be comprised of regret. It can be comprised of love. It can be comprised of happiness. Both pleasant and unpleasant emotions. And as Professor Bolden says, it is not linear. And I can experience those emotions for short bits of time, and I can experience one or a mix of those emotions for an extended period of time. You also have to throw into that the awareness that the chemicals that we call emotions, the original chemicals, so when we have a memory, when we recall, when we think about, the original chemical release only has a life of 3 to 6 seconds. So If I stay with an emotion, now call it feeling for longer than 6 seconds, that has to do with me and my own processing, my own recall, my own memory, my own thinking. So I think it's important to understand that all of those things are in the mix of what we call grief.
Grief, yes, yes.
Yes. And all of us, in different ways and at different times in our lives, will have and will experience grief.
Mhm.
Some more intense, some less intense. Some for short periods, some for longer periods. So we can't just talk about grief as just one experience.
Yeah.
We have to recognize its very deep complexities.
That's an amazing point because
We have to start there.
yeah, when I first was given this topic and I started to look it up, one of the things that stood out to me was exactly what you said, and it did stand out to me in anything that was written. I was just wondering, is grief only by loss of a loved one, or
It is
is it
lost, full stop.
grief? Exactly,
Loss.
exactly.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
you've done a brilliant job in making sure that that point is made this
Yes.
evening.
Right.
Because
Here's the other thing I'd want to suggest, if you don't
yeah,
mind. Where we have an emotional response only arises in the context of importance to us.
yeah,
That's important.
Yeah.
So that what is important to me
yeah.
may not be important to you.
Mhm.
So both of us might experience the loss of our mother, but the relationship we had with our mothers would be different.
Yeah, yeah.
Agreed?
Yeah.
I
So,
Yeah.
understand.
yeah.
No,
Yes, Professor. Yes.
I said, and building on Tony's point, as someone pointed out, loss is like reaching out for something that was always there, something that we depended upon, only to find out that when we need it one
It's no
more
longer
time,
there.
it's no longer there,
Yes.
right?
Whoa, whoa. Interesting. All right. So
Yes.
so with that being said, then understand that it is relative, understanding that loss is not simply based on the loss of a loved one, but even beyond that, it's a case where it could be a loss of job, it could be a loss of house, it could be a loss of whatever the
The end
case
of a
may be.
marriage.
Just
The end of
loss,
a
exactly.
marriage. Yes. Yes.
People grieve differently as well, according
Yes.
to the fact that is relative. I'm going back now to the query that I had earlier that I said we'll build on when Professor Bowden mentioned it. The grief for a male versus grief for a female, and understanding that the emotional implications may be different there, especially because of cultural or societal nuances. I'd like to know what is the difference between, or the common differences, I should say, because there's no one size fits all, but the common differences, Brother Tony, that you might have experienced with the way that a man grieves over his loss versus a woman grieves over her loss.
So I think you've partly answered the question as you wrapped up the question.
Okay.
Culture treats to how we express it,
Mhm.
not how we experience it.
Mm. Mm.
So sadness is sadness. Anger is anger. In other words, emotions are gender neutral. It is how we've been socialized to treat our emotions. Is how we've learned. Is what we have learned in terms of how we express our emotions, if we express them at all.
Sure. So actually, before we move on from that, Professor Bolden, do you have anything to add to that particular point in terms of the way that men grieve, in comparison to the way that women may grieve?
I agree with what was said, the permission given by society. And as the young student underscored, we feel the pain too, right?
Yes.
But we tend to talk about things through more doing. Like, I remember when I was working with a particular group of young males, as they began to talk about what's bothering them while we were in the process of developing a go-kart, as opposed to when they were working with the females. The leader came out and asked, "Oh, do you feel about these kinds of things?" And they were more open and more felt free to to just open up and talk about how they're feeling about a variety of things just like that. But as we look at, as we males are generally caught up in doing things. And as we begin to do things and build the relationships with each other, then some of these things that are really concerning to us begin to surface. Again, I must underscore, is not that we feel the loss any less, right?
Yeah.
But the way we feel comfortable, or the way we feel we are allowed to express it, even if a female say, "Well, you can tell us about how you feel," you're still dealing with the way your psyche says that, okay, I'm not supposed to do it this way.
Yes,
And
understood.
bear in mind, Romain, that most learning is unconscious. It takes place at an unconscious level.
Yeah.
Girls learn very early to share emotions. Watch 4, 5, 6-year-old girls who are going to the bathroom, even big women. They go in pairs. They will go in a pair. A woman will want to go to the bathroom and invite her friend to come go to the bathroom. A man will never do that.
Never. Never.
And so women have been socialized very early to bond and to share. We are not allowed, because if I share, that is a sign of weakness. That is perceived as a sign of weakness.
Understood.
So we express it where the intensity of the emotion is high. We can sometimes tend to express that in violence in its various forms. Yes.
Yeah.
A female will have the same emotion and will call up a girlfriend and have a conversation, talk about it.
Yeah.
A man will never do that.
Yeah.
Right. Again, the actions.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. He's going to play some dominoes.
Yes.
And buy a round of drinks or
Yes.
two.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we deal with it differently for sure.
Yes. And that is his holding of the hand.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And we will
females
eventually
will physically
talk.
hold hands. Pardon?
Yeah. And sometimes we eventually talk. When we get to talking about it,
Right.
you would understand that permission, they were craving that permission, but feeling that they're in a space that's safe enough and they would not be judged.
Judge, yes.
But once you create that safe space, that brave space where that guy could talk about it, you may be surprised about the degree to which that unburdening occurs.
Yeah, understood. So with that being said, then, I'm curious as to if the coping mechanisms are different then for males versus females, because that is essentially what I'm hearing coming out, that in some cases, because the man is a lot more restrictive of his feelings and a lot more isolated. Is it a case then where advice for both of them is kind of different because the male is different from the female, so we advise them differently?
In some instances, not in all instances, because there's some things that are very basic, what I would call basic. I made note of some of them. Maintaining a routine, right, is important as we begin to respond to grief and loss. Engaging in physical activity, eating healthy foods. Which is something that people do not always pay attention to. Remember, the body is taxed a lot during that emotional journey. So it's important to get the focus on eating and eating healthily, whether you're male or female, getting enough sleep, limiting the use of alcohol and those other substances, what sometimes is classified under category as short-term energy relieving behaviors. We would also encourage males, as we would encourage females, to seek help, to talk to loved ones, accept help that's offered, and also to do some things that people are now beginning to accept more, to engage in journaling and focus on hobbies and finding ways to celebrate the loved ones, whether you are male or female. These are things that we will emphasize, but how it is actually done may vary. But you would give some of these same advice, and there are a few more, whether you're male or female.
Understand. All right. Anything to add there, Brother Tony, in your experience?
So remember I said that at the core of grief is sadness.
Yes.
Sadness is an emotion. It's neither good nor bad, negative or positive. It just is.
Yeah.
What we know is that emotions are messages. They tell us what's going on with us, and we know that emotions have purpose. So you're asking about how do we cope? What are some coping devices, mechanisms? So that in the context of, from an emotional intelligence perspective, sadness, I'm experiencing loss. The purpose of sadness is to facilitate connection. So what's the coping mechanism? Whom do I connect with? Whom can I connect with? Now, instantly you realize you have a problem, because more and more in our society, we're becoming highly disconnected. That's a fact of life across the universe, across the world.
Yeah.
We're becoming very highly disconnected people. The purpose of sadness is to facilitate connection.
Got you.
Sometimes that connection, you're talking about coping, sometimes that connection is a touch. And the body releases oxytocin,
Yeah.
a chemical that allows us to come down. Yeah. So the first coping mechanism for me is to recognize what sadness is as an emotion, its message, and its purpose. Its purpose is to facilitate connection. Whom do I reach out and ask for help, ask to connect so I can share? The purpose of sharing is what we call now becoming emotionally literate, being able to express my emotion. What we teach is that if you can name your emotion, you can tame your emotion. Because I am no longer the emotion, I have become the observer of my emotion.
Mm.
And that allows me the process of beginning to take the sting, the intensity out of the emotion. Yes? So
Yeah.
by becoming an observer of it and naming it, I have begun the process of healing. Part of the power of naming it, or observing it and naming it, is that because I've recognized it, I can then get to decide what to do about it. Yeah.
Understood.
Pardon?
I was just saying I really like this. If you name your emotion, you can tame your emotion.
Yeah, if you can name it.
Yeah.
Romaine, I'm really disappointed. Romaine, I'm
Yeah.
really sad. I am sad. I'm experiencing sadness.
And that comes from honesty as well with yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
they're my emotions.
Yes.
Right. And I must underscore that point, the naming of emotions. And part of the challenge we have is that we are not, and the literature backs this up, that we are not giving our children the vocabulary
Yes.
they need to name their emotions.
The emotions.
Right? And that's a disservice that a lot of us are experiencing. And even in the books that we write, so I'm very deliberate in my writings now to make sure that I focus on expanding the vocabulary, when I'm focusing on the children's books in particular, to expand the vocabulary so that they can more accurately name those emotions, right? Which whereby everyone benefits. And the other point that I want to underscore that you said, Tony Olton, is the whole part about the connection, right? That is very important. And if I know if I'm allowed to go back to the differences between males and females, even as we reach out for help, right? it is harder to find those resources where we can make those connections. I am residing in the United States, and as I was even reaching out to find, I wanted a male therapist to help me process that. It was harder to find one that I can have that connection with to help me through that journey. But that's important. And when I didn't find it, I find the person I was hesitant to advance, or when I was connected with one, but I wasn't able to bond. That relationship wasn't able to develop, which I know was key to help me deal with this heavy emotional journey of loss. I backed off, right? So feeling that you have that connection is very, very, very important. And it's harder for males. And because this is an international audience, it is harder for Black males because the amount of choices you have, where the likelihood of having that connection is less when it comes to males, especially males of color.
Understood. So basically, where there's no guidance, then people fall. Where there's no abundance of counselors, where you can that safety net, that warm network to assist you. And I wanna spend some time there, because really and truly, we spoke about grief holistically. I like the foundation that was laid as far as placing grief beyond the loss of a loved one. But also, if we look at the grief of an individual, whether that be of a loved one or not of a loved one, but in another form or fashion, the support system that they have is extremely important. How can the loss, for instance, of a family member impact the dynamics among the remaining family members? I'm going to hand that one to Professor Bowden. Yes.
That's a difficult one,
Mm.
right? And it's very personal, right? When we lose someone, we have to realize that there's some altering of some patterns.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That is very, very important. And so there will be a lot of emotional. Remember, we're talking about grief and loss as something that's a heavily emotional experience. And the shifting of responsibilities sometimes could bring among some conflict and some disruption of routines. And then people grieve differently within a family, right? They grieve differently. Sometimes it's based on the relationship that they may have had with the lost one, the loved one who is no longer here, right? Or maybe their emotional makeup. And some people say, but okay, how come you're not? Right? And there's some judgment that sometimes occurs within the family members. There's some extreme tensions that occur. And sometimes there's some undelivered communications, right? Some guilt that people may be dealing with. Some may have been fortunate to have a conversation with the one who is no longer here. If we're dealing with the death of a loved one, they were able to bring some closure, but some may not have been able to have that kind of closure. So that undelivered communication sometimes lingers, right? And the person may have to wrestle with that. So within the family, there could be a plethora of emotions and tensions that are experienced, and that you have to dig beneath the surface to find out why. But the person has have to be willing to explore that, because sometimes you may not want to explore it because what might be unearthed may not be something that you want.
You're ready for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Understood.
So the question then is, the term that comes to mind is facilitator.
Yeah.
Who in the family has the awareness, has the tools, the framework, the connections to become the facilitator of that, and help the family facilitate or move through that process? Who has the patience,
Yeah.
right? Who has those connections so that different members of the family at different places in their relationship, etc., and as Professor Boda said, are expressing or not expressing differently. Who's that person who has the awareness, the skills, the tools, etc., who can engage the group, engage the subgroups, engage the individual, and work them through their own individual then and collective processes, so they can move to that place of healing and recovery.
Right.
So
And
you either have it within the family, or
Yeah.
there's some entity outside the family, individual or organization outside the family, can then help you facilitate that process.
right. And it requires a lot of patience. And
A
it
lot of
requires
patience.
not getting in the headspace where you're blaming, because
Yes,
family
yes.
members could quite easily do that because you're intimately connected with each other. So the pointing of fingers, but you have to realize the bigger picture. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to honor the loss of the loved one and respond to some basic things that must occur. So be willing to be flexible, right? And be willing to do what is so difficult for so many to do, to listen, right? And even in the silence, understand that the silence can speak loudly, right? And so sometimes we get so impatient and want to rush things along, right? And think that, okay, this is the only way that it should be done, especially when you have a family where there is someone who has always been in charge, so to speak, and for them to let go of that, and realizing that in this instance, they may not be the best person to guide the family members through this. And I'm going to sneak in something that I do want to point out, right?
Yeah.
Is that I'm a man of faith. I want to put that out there. I am a Christian. I need to make
I am
that
as well.
unmistakably clear.
Yeah.
But the pastor may not always be the best person to turn to, because they may not be adequately equipped to help you through the grief and loss process. Every pastor does not understand the dynamics as it relates to grief and loss.
Understood.
Okay? Praying for you and being there as a part of the support system is valuable, and pastors can do that, right? But I have in my work come across a lot of pastors in here, a lot of pastors say things to me, even while I was going through that grieving process, that wasn't the healthiest thing to say. So we have to do our homework as it relates when you talk about to whom do you reach out when you get to that point where you say that, okay, I need some professional help. And everyone who has experienced grief and loss may not need to counseling. I want to underscore that as well. But if you reach to that point where that is needed, that you need to be very deliberate in seeking out that help, and to make sure whether the person is your pastor or not, that they are adequately prepared to help you through this grief journey.
So therefore, what I'm hearing is that the ways that we address conflict need to be by finding a qualified source to assist us in the grieving process. Beyond that, is there anything else? I'll ask Brother Tony, is there anything else that we can say, or some of the ways that we can address conflicts that may arise, especially within the family dynamic in the grieving process?
I think for me, one of the things I seek to work on is resolving conflict, not initially at the group level or the collective, but at the individual level. Each individual is likely to have conflicting thoughts, memories, emotions around the experience. So I try to focus on trying to understand to what degree do these conflicts exist, both individually and collectively. One of the other things I seek to do is to, and again, from a place of patience, 2 seconds.
Mhm.
I need to disconnect. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I seek to, as deftly as I can, being aware, being sensitive, to get persons to move to a place of acceptance. That's pivotal.
Mhm. Understood.
And then to figure out in this moment, what are the things that are in my control?
Mhm.
In this moment, and one of the pivotal questions I seek to get to is, in the context of the loss of a loved one, is in your own mind, again, both individually and collectively, what's the best we can do to honor this person's memory?
Mhm.
What's the best you can do right now, in this moment, or going forward, that will show that you honestly valued, appreciated this individual? What would that look like? And have a conversation around that. Because part of the key to healing is action. Yes? What are you going to do
Yeah.
that honors? And because we're in this together, that keeps us together. What's the best that you can do? Can we figure those? Can we have a little conversation around that? What that looks like?
And it's interesting that you said that as well, because on the back of what Professor Bolden was saying, he was talking about the fact that, you have to find a qualified source to assist you in your time of grief. And it might not always be your pastor. I was wondering then, what advice could you give to someone who wants to support a grieving family, but really and truly aren't qualified or knows how to? So I think that you would have touched on it brilliantly in mentioning that, um, you know, we can look at the ways that we can honor their lives after the fact. I think that is definitely one way that we can go about supporting a grieving family, especially if we don't know or have any understanding of how to do so. We can find ways to honor their lives in the best manner that they would have been proud of even. And that would
Yes.
also help us get some solace or some comfort during a time of loss. Are
Mhm.
there any other ways that or advice that we can offer to someone who may want to support a grieving family, but generally is not clear as to how they can go about doing it?
I think the most powerful tool to the untrained is the ability to listen, what we call whole space. Just listen
Mhm.
and
Understood.
follow up with clarifying questions. In other words, you don't have to have the answer, but help the person to do their own processing. So the person shares, and so you have a follow-up question. What we teach is the power is not in the answer, the power is in the question.
Yeah.
So when you say that, do you mean this or do you mean that? When you say this, here's what I heard. Did I hear you correctly? And all you are is a sounding board. One of the things we teach is that he who has the problem has the solution. He who has the problem has the solution. So if you can listen to understand where the person is coming from, give that feedback and give them the space just to share. As they're sharing, then things become clear to them. And you're asking questions. Would it be more of this or less of that? And let them do the processing. Let them do the processing. And then suddenly, because you've asked the right question or questions, their own light bulbs go off.
Right.
So your most powerful tool, where you're untrained, but you have a desire to be to help in that moment, is just be a good listener.
Yeah.
And the ability to ask the right questions. How do you ask the right questions? By listening.
Right.
The right question is not in a book.
Mhm.
The right question is because you're present, you're listening, and you have a sincere desire to help the person through their own processing.
And that is very, very important. And I like the fact that what you said, because it's coming from a strengths perspective.
Yes.
That understand, but as the person begins to process, as they begin to engage in doing something, that they become empowered. You're not
Absolutely, yes.
empower the person become empowered to
Powered,
move
yes.
that journey. But as was just said, sometimes all they need is someone to listen to them,
Listen.
right? Or to let them know, just call the person, let them know that you're thinking about them, or sometimes just say, let's go for a walk, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes just doing that, a simple thing that's free, right? And that's healthy, right? Could be important for the person. But during this, and it's important to validate how the person is feeling. Remember that this grief journey is an individual journey, right? And so regardless of whether I'm sad or I am mad or what's not, the appropriate response, say for instance, if you're sad, when my mom died and I was standing beside the coffin, a pastor said, "What are you crying for? Don't be sad. Your mom is in a
In a
better
better
place."
place.
Wow.
Right? And you see, good intentions, but what was said, I can be totally transparent. My response at that point in time was one of anger, right? Like, how dare you tell me that? Right? I was in the church. Remember, I'm Christian. Remember the pastor. But you telling me that? Are you serious? Right? So then you put an extra burden on me, because then I had to deal with an extra emotion that I was not experiencing at that time, because you failed to validate
Yes.
how I was feeling, right? And that's very important. We need to stop thinking that we need to fix people, right? But that's the place that we tend to go to. Just like when, again, my mom died and I was still wrestling with it. One of my colleagues said, "You still dealing with that, the loss of your mom?" In other words, I should have gotten
Gotten over it.
Again.
right?
Yes.
And it is not something that you get over, you work through, right? And we have to understand that what it takes for an individual to work through the grief and loss differs. It's not something you get over, or there's no time frame in which that should be dealt with, whether we're talking about the tangible or intangible losses, right? It is an individual journey, and it's a heavily emotional journey, very heavy journey.
And you remember I said, Roman, a little while ago, that if you can name your emotion, you can tame your emotion.
Yes, definitely.
An important skill for that facilitator, or that person who seeks to help, the person is sharing, but they never quite name it for them. That's part of the validation. Whoa. That must have been overwhelming for you. Bam.
Name it. Yeah.
You've given them you've allowed them to name it. Because you've listened well enough and they've shared, you said, whoa, that must have been very overwhelming for you. Suddenly have a name for it.
Yes.
I mean, what happens? When you can name it, what happens?
You tame it.
That's right.
Understood. So then in cases where we have, because even as Professor Bolden would have mentioned his mom, Professor Bolden would also like to ask, from your perspective and having gone through what you have gone through, how is it then that we should encourage because remember, we are Family Fest at the end of the day, how is it that we should encourage the children, the teenagers, those younger ones to express their grief in a healthy way?
The same thing that we talked about earlier with the validating emotions and the creating that safe space for them. You have to acknowledge, I think we're better at it now than we used to, where we would say children should be seen and not heard, or we dismiss what children are feeling, right?
Yeah.
As relevant, we tell them how they should feel. right? Acknowledging, validating how the child or the teenager may be feeling. Allow for that open communication where they would not feel that they are judged um, by when they share their feelings. And remember the connections. We also talk about the connections being important. Sometimes sharing your own journey, not making it about you, because it's
Yes.
important that you not make it about you. But sometimes sharing where they can have a feeling that you can maybe not relate specifically to their experience, but that you have experienced grief and loss, so you have some understanding of the burden that they may be going through. Doing such things, employing such um, tools as journaling, where they could make note of how they feel or what is growing in appreciation is art therapy, where they can draw how they feel, the whole notion of music, as you talk about with teenagers and children, the art, the storytelling, the conversations with loved ones who they trust, and engaging in familiar activities, right? Because the person is no longer there, but life continues, right? And there's sometimes people feel so distraught that they feel that all is over, right? So, and we talk about this new normal. The new normal may be doing some of what you've always accustomed to be doing, but without the loved ones being there. So helping them to normalize the process, right? But creating that safe space where they could begin to laugh again. I understand it's okay to be happy again. It's okay to laugh again, and think about how your loved one would have wanted to be honored and to continue. Or what would the loved one want for you?
Understood. Anything to add to that, Brother
Yeah,
Tony?
so yeah, sure. There's a mnemonic that we use. It's VET, vet. Validate. We've said that quite often in our time together this evening. Help them to validate the emotions. When we said emotions, they're neither good nor bad, negative or positive, they just are. So you validate the emotions, and then you explore what else were you feeling, and what do you think made that feeling arise, or those feelings arise. Yeah. What do you see as being your options? No, that's the Tina. How do we transform the feelings? So you validate, you have to explore, and then you have to transform the feelings. Yeah. As a simple tool, a mnemonic to help you remember how you function in that space where you're seeking to connect and help someone through their period, a moment of grief.
Understood. Yeah. All right. So I think there's a lot of food for thought inside of this one discussion. I personally think that there are many around us who have significant challenges in how they deal with the grieving process. And a discussion like this should be one that is continued, one that is encouraged even, so that they can benefit from the knowledge and the understanding that you gentlemen would have shared this evening as well. I personally, well, as a Christian, I think there's a huge part in leaning on God that can be taken from this as well. I know that, for instance, Jesus himself wept.
Yes.
So I think that even in what you were saying with men, find it difficult to be because of societal or cultural norms or expectations. I think that we have to understand that we can be raw and true to ourselves. Once we name it, we can tame it. So we have to be able to express ourselves in a way that allows for us to be true about how we feel. And in so doing, we understand that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and save those who are crushed in spirit. But I also want to point out that what you said about, having those around you that are qualified sources that you can have conversations with, that you can not only share with, but that can listen to what you're saying and probably even name what the grieving process that you're going through is and help you. But they have to do that by listening. So you have to surround yourself with the right community. I remember Professor Bowden would have also mentioned that, you know, there needs to be some level of guidance that when a person falls or when a person has an issue of grief, there needs to be qualified counselors, as mentioned, or qualified people to walk them through that process. And it's not always that you will find that in the pastor. So if it is a case where you don't find it in your pastor, you can go about seeking it elsewhere. Some people may not be members of churches. So in those cases, they can definitely seek it elsewhere and just make sure that they have the right ones to give advice at that time. But I want to invite you to just give us your wrapping up thoughts, really. Anything that you want to share, whether it be bringing conclusion to what you've said this evening, or whether it be a case where you want to summarize what you would have said or share something that you might have left out. I want to give you the opportunity now to share it, because we're now basically at the end of our session for this evening and how we experience grief. So before I started the discussion with our Professor Bowden leading, so I'll end it with our brother Tony. You can start us off with anything that you would have to add at this time to conclude our discussion for the evening.
Just to summarize that grief is an inherent part of the human experience. We are all going to have suffered or are going to suffer loss in some form or fashion. To recognize that grief is a complex emotional state of being, that our emotions were given to us for our survival. And the challenge is to be able to identify our emotions, process those emotions, and importantly, decide what we're going to do about those emotions. Because we all experience life differently, we're going to approach and treat the grief differently. So we have to allow space and time for a person to do their own processing. So compassion, empathy, and patience are critical for us where we're working with others who themselves are experiencing grief.
Excellent. Professor Bowden?
Yes. What I'd like to underscore again, the complexity of the grief journey, and that it is an individual journey, but to also, especially for us males, to acknowledge that it's okay to accept help and to reach out for help, and for or females to understand that we grieve differently, right? But it doesn't mean that we're grieving any less. And both of us need to be patient with each other, understanding the differences in how we have been socialized. But at the root of it all is love. When we are dealing with response to a loss of a loved one, it is a love journey. We're journeying with someone who we love, and even as we respond to through the grieving process, love must still be at the core as we seek to honor that person, honor the relationship we've had with that person.
Excellent. I think that's an excellent note for us to end on. Remember, validate, explore, and transform as well.
Yes.
As was mentioned by our brother Tony. I want to say a special thank you to you, gentlemen. I think that you've done an exceptional job. I'm sure that those watching at home can join me in applauding these gentlemen. Thank you for being the panelists for this evening. I want to say a special thank you as well to all the panelists that I met before, as well as the moderators that would have facilitated our sessions for Family Fest 2025, because this is actually the last discussion for this month for Family Fest. So I think that you guys have done an excellent job rounding up the discussion in grief this evening, and we are heading into our 7th year in 2026. So we're really looking forward to all that is being done within the Family Fest ministry, and I would invite those that are watching, whether now or in the future, at any point in time, to help us to touch every family in Barbados, and even those on the outside of Barbados. We go into the region, we go internationally. Help us to touch families where there is a need. Family Fest would like to be present, to help build families around the world and make it on a global scale rather than just, even Barbados. But we definitely want to allow our home drums to beat first. And I'm going to invite you to just remain in contact with us. Follow us on social media at Family Fest. We have a YouTube page. We have a Facebook page. So find us, Family Fest Barbados, and we'll be more than happy to remain in contact. If you wanted to have an extensive conversation or need additional assistance, especially through the grieving process, along with contacting Family Fest, you can contact us at info@familyfestbarbados.org. That is, once again, the email address, info@familyfestbarbados.org. Or you can contact helplines, because there are necessary helplines that we have, especially here on island, that if you're listening to this from or watching this from Barbados, know that there's a way that you can get help. The grieving process is not one that you have to walk alone. We would have spoken about qualified sources, and I wanted to make sure that, in this period of need, you have the requisite authorities that you can reach out to. So there's Lifeline Barbados, and they're available 24 hours of the day. Yeah. So Lifeline Barbados, you can contact them. The area code will remain the same for all these numbers as their local numbers. So that is 1246. But Lifeline Barbados is 536-4500. Once again, 536-4500. We have Barbados Association of Professional Social Workers, which is the same area code as mentioned, 1246-240-8572. That's 240-8572 for the Barbados Association of Professional Social Workers. We have Business and Professional Women's Club, the crisis hotline, which is available 24/7 as well. And that is at 435-8222. 435-8222, available 24/7. That's the crisis hotline and the Business and Professional Women's Club. We have the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment Hotline, who are also available to help. That's the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment Hotline, and they're very willing to help, and they're easy to remember as 439-HELP. Usually that is seen as something that the older ones would understand and not the younger ones by putting help in the numbers. So I'll just explain, I'll state as well what those numbers are. That is 439-4357. 539-4357. 539-4357. Any one of those organizations you can contact locally for assistance. And as I said, if you're an international or regional person that is in need of assistance as well, you can feel free to reach out to info@familyfestbarbados.org. But once again, I want to say a special thank you to you for joining us this evening. A special thank you to our panelists. And I do invite you to continue to support Family Fest and to share this link, because it doesn't have to be a monetary support or anything. You can simply share this link to someone that you know is grieving, or it might be a time where you yourself may be going through a difficult experience of loss, as we established that grief is not only limited to a loss of a family member, but as mentioned, it's across the board. It's a loss period. So you might be going through a loss of some form, and we invite you to come back, visit this link, and also share it with anyone that at any point in time may be going through a difficult period. So with that being said, on behalf of Family Fest for 2025, I would like to sign out by saying a rousing thank you for your support, and we look forward to serving you in the future. Thank you.
We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. With God on our side, we're marching strong.